Hello everyone, welcome to Go Global World. Here we discuss challenging topics for startup entrepreneurs from around the world with the aim to help them to access markets with the goal to support their initiatives to build international companies and provide value around the world. And one of the topics is very hot right now is the regulation in different countries, sanctions law, and different other aspects related to compliance. So this topic is not something that every entrepreneur is well versed, and we decided to address this topic in details so you guys can see the issue you may face with, and at the same time you can have our recommendations how to solve it yourself. For this reason, I have invited our partners, Sanctions Law Compliance. Actually, they're called Sanctions Law, and the guys are very experienced in supporting companies in Europe and States to make their compliance effort seamless. So welcome guys to our podcast. I'm happy to have you. We have today Anna Ivonina, Evgeny Afanasyev, and Roman Rasimas.
And today we will speak about compliance, its importance in modern international trade, international relations, business, and how compliance can help your company to avoid huge risks from breaching sanctions provisions or export restrictions. Many of you probably have heard about sanctions and its role and impact in modern trade, international relations. Due to sanctions and their impact, many companies have to terminate their contracts with counterparties, find new markets, new also counterparties, and also company have troubles when make payments through sanctioned Russian banks. That is why companies are highly interested in a tool, in a legal instrument that can help them to avoid sanctions risks. And personally, me and my colleagues, we suggest that the best way to avoid those risks is a sanctions compliance system in your company structure. So generally, sanctions compliance is a department in a company consisted of well-qualified staff, compliance officers that on a daily basis check counterparties and also potential deals of a company on sanctions risks. And when they identify those risks, they mitigate them or eliminate. Also within sanctions compliance offices, they adopt special sanctions policies, and they contain obligations of company staff, of top management, to report when they identify risks in their job. Also, in these policies, we can find liability of top management, liability of staff when they don't report about identified risks. And last but not the least element of sanctions compliance is trainings on sanctions law and sanctions compliance that also help staff of the company knew about sanctions and to be aware of breaching. Speaking about risks, they are really severe. For example, in US, fines vary between $250,000 up to $1 million. And for example, the last case of Clear Junction Limited, it's a British provider that breached, that violated sanctions law in Great Britain when provided payments to Russian nationals. And this company was fined 36,000 pounds. But we also knew positive cases, as I must say. So it's when compliance helped company to lift sanctions. It's two Russian companies in the oil sphere, NNK and NNK Primornefteprodukt. Treasury in US decided to lift sanctions when management company of NNK and NNK Primornefteprodukt agrees to stop supply oil to North Korea and agreed to create a special sanctions department within the management company. Also within SLC, we created a special sanctions policy to Russian logistic company, and this policy helped company to avoid risk when since they wanted to supply items to Crimea in breach of US and EU sanctions prohibitions. And when you ask why my company personally and I should know about sanctions, if I'm not a UK or EU company, for example, if your company is registered in Russia, when you should comply with sanctions, there are a list of criteria. You can check it, and if for example your main supplier is located in US or Great Britain, EU, you should comply with US sanctions. When the beneficiary of your company has citizenship, green card or other residence permit in US, UK or EU, you also should comply with sanctions legislation of other country. When US or UK, EU market is vital to you, and so on. So there are a lot of criteria when company should comply with sanctions.
My name is Evgeny, and I'm an LCLC partner, and this part is dedicated to export restrictions. And at this moment, it has become more obvious that export restrictions are able to harm businesses no less than sanctions. And in general, export restrictions are part of export control mechanism and necessary to determine which goods, technologies, and services can be supplied outside the country. Such goods, technologies, and services can be called controlled items. And in general, they are used for military purposes or so-called dual use. So they can use for civil and military purposes as well. But sometimes state control and purely civil items, as we've seen in the Export Administration Regulation of the United States. Basically, the export control mechanism has the following elements. First of all, control items, they should be defined, and these control items are determined through export codes, consist from letters or numbers. No less important is to determine control operations. As a general rule, we see that regulations control export, re-export, transfer, and other operation. Plus, the basis of such system is obtaining a license from authorized body. However, sometimes regulation provides some exemptions. And in this case, you can supply control items without a license. Last but not least is record keeping and reporting procedure. Back to export restriction, we can define them as restriction on transaction with control items to certain territory or state. And for example, you may have heard about export restriction, which were posed by various of countries against Russia. And for example, among the other things, the European Union banned the export of dual-use items to Russia and related assistance and services. And such a ban is also was also implemented by European Union against the Belarus. And if they see the number of the list of dual-use items, This the number listed in the regulation 821. They are numbers, and in this list listed on a few hundred pages. The next section of my speech is dedicated to who should aware of export restrictions. And a bit earlier, you have already passed the test on the need to comply with foreign sanction. Export control and restrictions are a bit simpler. And in this case, if you are somehow involved in foreign economic or trade activity, then compliance with export control and restriction is relevant for you. However, domestic market actors don't have immunity from export control restriction or their consequences. For example, imagine that a distributor sells European control items and the European Union introduce export restrictions against the distributor country. Then the vendor is basically obliged to comply with export restriction, and the distributor would not receive any products of this vendor. And another example is a manufacturer works only in domestic market, but they use European Union software, and this software is controlled. Then if European Union impose export restrictions against the manufacturer country, then the manufacturer would force to suffer losses and quickly search for replacement and migration. De facto, you may face export restriction in any role, whether it be individual or entity, manufacturer, distributor, etc. And the next part is about responsibility. It's an important question for many persons. In many cases, companies, even though they are aware of the need for compliance, they refuse due to little liability. And let's look at the United States and the European regulation related to export control and restriction to find out how serious is the risk of non-compliance. One of the recent examples of liability for violation of the US export control regulation is Russian airline companies such as Aeroflot, UTair, 7, etc. And they are under indeed, they are under a temporary denial order in accordance with export administration regulation. So they are banned from export, re-export, and transfer and other operation with control items. At the moment, the temporary order has been introduced only for a period 180 days, but it doesn't mean that everything will end there. In general, as I said, my colleague and the United States have established criminal and administrative penalties for violation, not only sanction, but export control and restriction as well. In turn, the European Union haven't established the single system of penalties, and each state determines its own penalty for violation. However, to summarize, the European Union states can also provide criminal and administrative liability. And in this regard, it's important to note that a few months ago, the European Commission introduced initiative according to which the violation of export restriction and sanction should be considered as a crime. And currently, some countries have established only administrative liability for violation. Then even this country should implement criminal liability if such initiative will be adopted. Considering the EU, I also can mention one of the recent example of liability. In May, a trial began against the German entrepreneur accused of supplying controlled items products to Russia in violation of sanction and export restriction. And according to prosecution, since 2017, this person has been supplying prohibited electronics to firms associated with the Russian military sector, Russian military services. And these electronics were used for weapons production. This entrepreneur has done it without permission, and now we are currently waiting for the sentence. And the last part of my speech is dedicated to how can you mitigate risks. And as with sanctions, the risk associated with export control and restriction can be minimized. And the best option is compliance function, working compliance function. But if you don't have such one, the compliance function, you may ask for expert advice, and for expert control and restriction matters, we can help you. Recently, a Russian IT company contacted us for consultation, and we were interested in the US and European Union export restrictions. They affect their operation. Indeed, based on the provided export costs, we have identified products that can be supplied only with authorization, and realizing that, the company began searching for replacement, and as a result, they minimize risks. That's all for me, and stage yours, Roman.
So hi everyone, my name is Roman. I'm also a partner at Sanctions Law Consulting, and I will talk about one of our main practices, which is the compliance in the field of anti-money laundering and combating the finance of terrorism. So AML compliance is critical to preventing fraud, money laundering, and other financial crimes. Regardless of your industry, if you allow customers to move money around, you could be a target for money laundering. Measures to prevent it include having your financial service or institution verify each customer's identity and monitor their transactions. This may also include asking customers for more information when the transactions are significant or suspicious, for example. There are two main aspects why we should consider money laundering a serious problem. The first one is more from society's perspective. So the biggest problem with money laundering is that it funds and enables organized crime. Often it is generated drugs, tax evasion, illegal goods, or human trafficking, and it is used to support acts of terrorism as well. For example, there is a statistic from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which estimates that about from 2 to 5% of the current global GDP, which is from $800 billion to up to $2 trillion, has entered the global banking system through money laundering, which is a lot. And therefore, it comes as no surprise that to combat the problem, legislation in the EU and other jurisdictions is being established, and regulators require financial services providers to screen individuals who use their services in an attempt to prevent the practice of money laundering. As to the business aspects of the problem of money laundering, we should talk about the activity of regulators around the world, because failure to comply with AML legislation in any jurisdiction can lead to serious penalties. For example, in 2021, Deutsche Bank was fined $130 million. Swedbank was fined 5.5 million euros for non-compliance with AML legislation and for providing an infrastructure, basically, for money launderers. And hundreds of smaller financial institutions are annually fined by local regulators for hundreds of thousands of millions. And as an example, we can remember a case of Paysera, which is a Lithuanian fintech company. It was fined for AML legislation violations, and the fine was around 350,000 euros. And also, we can remember even more significant cases in the US, where the BitMEX crypto exchange was fined $10 million. And even in Turkey, we can remember a case of Binance, of Turkish branch of Binance, which was fined for some serious amounts of money for violating local AML legislations. So I have already named a bunch of companies which were fined, and from the examples of these companies, you can guess who should be subject to AML compliance. And the eligibility test is pretty easy, because if you allow your customers, your clients, to move money around, to use your financial infrastructure to receive and send funds, whether it's like fiat money or cryptocurrency, then you must be compliant with the AML and CTF regulations. So it's all about banks, including trust companies, credit unions, licensed fintech companies, as well as asset managers, financial advisors, crypto exchanges, and even gift card sellers, resellers, and all the like a vast majority of several merchants must comply with AML legislation and must have AML compliance programs. As for our services, we are ready to provide a complete package of services for any organizations that are required to comply with AML legislation. And if you don't want to be fined, if you would like to be fully compliant with the relevant legislation, you should definitely have AML compliance program. You should have internal regulations on how you deal with your local financial regulator with respect to suspicious transactions, significant transactions, and even about your internal policies, because a key to success is to always be in touch with your regulator, to discuss your internal policies and to ask them on how you can make them even better, even more successful, and to become more compliant. So basically, all the documents, all the regulations and internal instructions that I have listed can be created on your own using your in-house lawyers, or for example, using different online constructors. But all the stuff that can be prepared in such a way will be too typical, too not reliable in terms of your exclusive activities, something that differs your company from other companies. So that is why a deeper analysis must be performed. Everything should be applied to the regulations that you must have within the scope of compliance documents of your company. So we'll be more than happy to assist you, to help with preparation of documents, reviewing your current documents, and communicating with your local regulator. That's it for AML compliance. Thank you so much.
I have an example related to a recent case with Y Combinator. And the thing is that who participated in the startup school, they received a message that they asking that you, the participants from around the world, are compliant with sanctions law, and so what you're mentioning, that sanctions can be from many countries, and it's a cross sanctions thing. And right now, the Western world is imposed a lot of sanctions on Iran, North Korea, Russia, and some part of Ukrainian territories. So the question is, how for small companies to get compliant? Is it enough to get a message like in your system, probably in your contract, stating that please confirm, my client, that you are not breaking the law, or like you're fully compliant, imposing the responsibility on client side, so removing it from yourself. Does it work? Can it be applied? Do you have any?
It's not so obvious, and that is why you should analyze every potential deals, every potential clients, because many of them may be toxic for your company, even though they are not on the list themselves on SDN, for example, in the US. But according to 50% rule, the beneficiary can be on sanction list. That is why US sanctions also apply to this company. And you can see this in a special program that in your computer. So special staff, compliance officers, they should analyze those risks for your company, and then you can understand, is it can lead to violation of sanctions. So typical provisions in your contracts not always can help you to avoid risks.
About the responsibility of your client for being in violation or not is, of course, a must. You should have such thing, but it's not enough, definitely.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for the talk. Great examples.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video and got some useful tips. I would like to conclude with an idea that being compliant has numerous benefits. Such benefits include reducing legal costs, improving operational efficiency, enhancing reputation and customer trust, and many, many others. And if you are a beginner, then my advice is to decide once and for all that you should be compliant. Commitment is the most important part because the whole business and corporate culture are based on it. And you can start by identifying areas of compliance relevant to your business. For example, I recommend you to do the test which were provided by us earlier. And if you are not beginner, then well done, keep working on being 100% compliant, and always remember that compliance saves your money, which is why all your efforts are worth it. And I'm sure that Airbus that paid almost 4 billion in 2020 for non-compliance would agree with me.
On this note, I think it's time to close the session. Well, everyone who participated, first of all, we have discussed a lot of things related to sanctions law, export compliance, and anti-money laundering things. Of course, it's not possible to cover everything, and specifically your situations to be compliant. Feel free to ask questions here in the comments. Of course, subscribe to the channel and give us some thumbs up, so we can have YouTube algorithm recommending this video to more viewers so they can get this kind of support. And we really appreciate your help and any recommendations to your network of this video, because this is a specific intention to help. Moreover, since Sanctions Law team is our partners, you can have 10% discount if you're a member of Global World, just for working with them. And that might help your business, and it's a small incentive that can save so much effort for you. My final say that unfortunately sanctions are so strict, and sometimes they might be so severe, so preparing or preventing them is way cheaper and way more important to have a plan how to avoid them. Then when you face something like this and cannot do much about this, your business may die, and you may have personal consequences. It depends on the country and specific situation, but just be aware of this, try to investigate, try to do your due diligence yourself, and if you already have some signs that you need to dig deeper, find experts who can help you. In the end, in Go Global World, you can have answers to most of the questions, and we try to help. So you can reach us out at info@GoGlobalWorld, or you just can be on our global chats or here on YouTube, write comments, send us messages. We will try to help. At Go Global World, everyone here is not just to help yourself, but mostly they help each other as a first intention of existence of our community. One entrepreneur helps the other entrepreneur. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon at other talks specifically for you entrepreneurs from around the world. All right, goodbye.